Hello and welcome to a special episode of the news review. We're adding this to the front of the one I've already recorded, which is why I look different, and I've got someone else here.
And I've got wet hair, which is why I look.
I've basically just grabbed her from the storm outside and said, "Please come and talk to us about a special subject."
Yes,
and the special subject is censorship, isn't it?
Yeah, I think more specifically, it's re-editing old works to change phraseology, words, and to just generally sanitize them. And we got to discussing about this. And
does that make you a bit lighter? Yeah,
it does actually. Yeah,
I can't hold it like that though.
You know, to be honest with you, if people are tuning into this and going, "Oh, I don't like the look of that rough one on the on the edge," then...
well, they're stuck with me because I'm the host.
No, but we're specific.
Self-depreciating humour. Follow in.
Yes. Anyway, meanwhile, back at the ranch, what we were talking about specifically was Enid Blyton books, Magic Faraway Tree.
Yeah.
And it's always been a big narc of mine that you can't get a new version of that book, as far as I can tell, that hasn't been vandalised. And I feel that the edits have gone too far with that.
To an extent. For those of you who aren't familiar, Enid Blyton is a very, very well-regarded children's author from Britain who was prevalent in the 20s through to the 80s.
Well, no, I think...
Wasn't it the 20s or was it the 40s?
I think she starts in the late 20s in terms of commercial success. Really big in the 30s, 40s and 50s and sort of into the 60s.
And to an extent in the 80s, he could still get Enid Blyton books all over the place. She was still very big. The Famous Five, The Secret Seven. Yeah. You've heard of these characters.
Yeah, I think there's some books which are like forever in print, and like Famous Five and Secret Seven, they never go out of print. But I believe she wrote somewhere in the region of 800 books during her lifetime. And some of these you just can't find anymore, out of print for a long time. And when you know what they're called, are we allowed to say what it's called?
Go on then.
There's a particular book from going off from memory. I remember.
And you caught. This is not something that you would normally say in conversation.
Yeah,
and this is the thing that we're going to get onto. We've had to put a disclaimer on just for saying the name.
Yeah, there's a book. I think it's called The Three Gollywogs. And so, like, as soon as I say that, you're like...
Yeah, you're like, oh, I can see why that one might not be in print.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, the doll, which by the time I was a kid in the 80s, they were just called Gollies. And they were still around. I mean, there's the logo on a marmalade from Robinson's Marmalade was a Golly.
Yeah, until comparatively recently. But... there's other books, like the Magic Faraway Tree books. They're a big case in point because they've changed the names of the children. They got rid of Dame Slap. And I personally feel that there's something fundamentally wrong about editing an old book comprehensively. I think perhaps come with a disclaimer saying, you know, that this is a book of its time. But in terms of changing the name Joe, spelt J-O, to Joe, spelt J-O-E, why? What's the point of that? That just smacks for me of fiddling for some underhand reason. Now, I've got an original copy of, I think it's Five Go Off to Camp, and it's a Famous Five book. And what surprises me actually reading that is it does drop an N-bomb. And you've got to remember, in the 1930s when this was written, people used to say that and think nothing, you know, casual racism. And, you know, it's very much of its time. And I can understand why things like that might be changed. But what I do dislike is comprehensive rewriting of books. I think it smacks of political correctness, which I think is a bad thing. You know, I think it's reminds me of 1984 and like Newspeak. It's like, no, we don't want you saying.
But at the same time, this is why I wanted to bring you onto the podcast specifically for what you've just said. the original version of that book, you read the 80s reprint, didn't you? And that had been taken out, and you didn't notice.
I didn't notice. And, arguably, if a young kid reads Magic Faraway Tree now, there will be no Dame Slap in there. There'll be none of the other characters like we mentioned before, Gollies, things like that. They
changed Moonface as well, didn't they?
What did he become and why?
I'm sure they changed Moonface on the grounds that they thought or was it the one that they didn't change, but there was a discussion about changing him because people thought it might be offensive to people with Down syndrome.
Yeah, I thought Saucepan Man as well came under the cosh for like making fun of mental illness, and then you think it's like, hold on, no, you're bringing like various agendas into a book and freeloading in effect on Enid Blyton's popularity and success to get an agenda across.
I think to a certain extent there is that, because Moonface, when I read it, I thought it was a man, because it was in a fantasy setting, a man who had a face like the moon.
It was basically a play on the Man on the Moon.
Yeah, that's what I thought it was. And the Saucepan Man, I thought he was like the Tin Man. He wore saucepans as armour and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I never read it. I mean, I was like 12 when I read The Faraway Tree.
Yeah, and see, I
never read it with an agenda like that.
Yeah, and I never took any prejudices away from that. I never thought years later, it's like, I've been doing, because of reading it in a book, I've been doing something dodgy for a long, long time. And it never happened. Now, what's interesting is that, it's just come to mind, other authors of that period who were active in the 20s, 30s, 40s, writing children's books, I'm not aware that they've ended up being edited in any way.
The Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys get updated for every generation, I know that.
And what I was actually thinking was Arthur Ransom, Swallows and Amazon books. And I must go and have a look. In fact, no, I've read some old copies of them from like the 1960s, 1970s, and I'm not aware of anything having been changed. She's still called Titty, isn't she? I think that would just be, I think it would be such an uproar if you changed Titty, who I believe...
I've never read those books. I have to admit, I've never read the Swallows and Amazons ones.
It was never explained. What, like, Titty? What a strange name. But there's a fan theory that actually her proper name is Titania, as in like in the Shakespeare books.
Oh, I thought she'd
Titty
been
is a
something
nickname.
like Patricia.
No, she's just always referred to as Titty. Everybody calls her Titty. But if you watch the film from the 1970s very closely, on her jotter that she's writing her diary in, it says Titania Walker on the cover.
Nice.
So there you are. But again, it's like, why? Why would you assume that kids are going to be like, oh, buxom rack? Because it's just not the case.
I can't believe you just did that on camera.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. But it's with the Enid Blyton stuff, it bothered me a lot that they changed Joe, spelled J-O, to J-O-E, and I believe
that I don't understand.
Yeah, and I think, was it Beth became Lizzie, and Fanny became Franny with the R inserted, and it's like, hold on, these were common names back in the 1920s. Or common contractions in names. And it's like, what agenda are you pushing? Why do you think kids are going to not understand somebody who's called Fanny?
And that's why I brought up the Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys. That's why I brought up the Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys. The Nancy Drew books that I read in the 80s had references to Dungeons and Dragons. And I remember this specifically.
So they kept them hip and with it.
Yes. There was one story where they changed the game that... caused one person to be a suspect in a murder. From, I don't know, I can't remember what it was in the original, but in the 80s one, it was Dungeons and Dragons, and they thought that this person had murdered someone because the person they'd murdered had killed their character in Dungeons and Dragons.
Right. So does this mean now that with the rise of like 80s retro chic and Stranger Things, that actually they've just gone back to the 80s version when they've updated it?
Quite possibly.
Because D&D's back in.
But Nancy Drew, when she was in the film that was out, my goodness, it'll be about a decade ago now, she was updated to be a modern girl.
Oh, you always see that in film adaptations.
Yes, but you see it in the books for that as well, because it keeps it more relevant to what the kids would understand. And I think there is a certain amount of that, of just updating it so that it's still relevant to the modern era.
But the thing is, you see, when this all came out about the magic faraway tree, there was such a backlash. I don't know whether they then went back on that or not.
I would hope some of it, but
you know, like
changing the name of that cat to Blackie.
Yeah, I think it was a dog, and like I think everybody like N-bomb, and it was changed to Blackie, and I don't think there's anybody who would vehemently argue that no, that should have been left in. So there's certain things like that I can see, because the word has become so offensive and has been used so damagingly as a derogatory term. I can understand why that might be taken out, but I do think that editing other stuff, I mean, like Dame Slap, and they presumably decided they'd edit her out because, this corporal punishment thing, this is a bad thing. But Dame Slap got a bad rap in the books.
Yeah,
she was not a hero. It was not considered a good thing that she was doing. So, you know, maybe actually the message is therefore being lost with this drive for PC nonsense, that actually these people who do the like slapping kids and stuff, actually it's like, should tell another adult about them, because that's not right.
So I think that's the main crux of the argument, that if something has to be edited and updated to keep it relevant to modern kids, it has to be done in a sense of there has to be a context, and you have to be aware of what it was about.
See, the thing is, when I read Famous Five books when I was a kid, that they were very timeless. When you read Enid Blyton books, they didn't actually specifically date themselves to a very specific thing. They didn't mention contemporary things particularly. They had no cultural references of the time. Such that when you read a Famous Five book in the 19th...
I think a Famous Five do have cultural references. They have a policeman who turns up to their meetings. When was the last time you saw a policeman?
That's a Secret Seven, you muppet.
When was the last time you saw a policeman?
No, but the thing was, when I read Secret Seven books, I could imagine... It was no leap of faith to imagine it as being current. Same with the Famous Five books. And actually, even when you read an original edition that drops its N-bomb and all that, it doesn't date itself especially. You know, it's got some of the stereotypical, lashings of ginger beer, and there's you know, the stereotypical roles, like, the girls prepare the food because that's what the girls do. And I read somewhere that they were trying to edit it as well so that, you know, Anne didn't always end up washing the dishes. No, but this isn't a boys thing. No, us girls will go and do this because that's what girls do. And, you know, when you read it, I never sat there and thought, I'm going to go around and tell all girls, you belong in the kitchen. Because I'm not a moron. And, you know, when you read it, you thought, gosh, haven't times changed? Even as a small kid, I knew that, like, so steady on.
Yeah, that's another good point. When all of these people are so desperate to edit things, are they actually just insulting children and saying, well, children won't get this?
Children are cleverer than you give them credit for. They're also very good at observation. And don't let kids acting up make you think that they need this sort of, like, their moral compass to be beaten into them. Actually, kids do generally know what's right and wrong. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to stick to what's right.
Yeah, that's true.
But they know when they're being bad.
So,
and kids can get their heads around some quite complex concepts quite well. In some respects, kids come to it without the baggage that adults tend to pick up, which means that actually they can see things an awful lot clearer than we do because they don't have preconceptions.
And there you are. So thank you, Jen, for coming on and sharing your views. It's
You're
much
welcome.
appreciated. And now we're going to move back to the the rest of the
regular
podcast
service will be resumed.
Regular service will be resumed. Are you going to eat biscuits while I do my outro?
You said
I'll get you back to the pre-recorded piece of the podcast. So see you in a moment. It's a horribly wet day, so if I look a bit straggly, it's because I've been out in the rain. And yeah, that's what happens. And also, anyone who wonders, I banged my head while filming yesterday. It's one of those things. If you're ever filming a model, then you've got to be careful of the edges of that model. And I don't mean model as in catwalk. I mean model as in a small set, a miniature world. Like someone's created another world, and it's very small. What am I talking about? Let's just get straight into the news. Now, it's been a few months since we had an episode, and that's because lots of things have been happening, and I didn't have time. But I do want to get back to either weekly or bi-weekly episodes where we can talk about the news and discuss the topics that are going on. Now, we're using a different format today because I'm actually filming on a webcam straight onto a computer, and I actually have live stream equipment and just recording straight onto the computer. So if I press this button here, then it brings up BBC News as if we're on the live stream. And what we can see here, if I bring the screen up properly, this guy on BBC News, Jamaica deportation. I feel I was punished twice when I was deported. Now, this guy, he committed multiple offences, and he was imprisoned, and now he's been deported. And a lot of the news is dealing with this case as if it's a bad thing that he's been sent back to Jamaica. Now, here's the bit that's really, really important. I'm going to highlight it on the screen. Mr. Crawford was convicted 10 times for a total of 22 offences. So, if you've been convicted 10 times for 22 offences, I think the UK is actually justified in getting rid of you. And there's someone who was on Twitter, and I would find it and show you that tweet if I could actually find it. Unfortunately, I couldn't. It's that's the problem with Twitter. So many things get buried. The guy said he lives in the Far East. I think it's Thailand he lives in with his wife. And he says that even though he's married and he has a child there, if he was convicted of burglary or drugs offences or any other serious crime, he would serve his time and then he'd be kicked out of the country. And no one's crying about Thailand being too bad on people because they're kicking out criminals. So why is the UK any different? And the reason the UK is different is because for so long we have taken quite a lenient approach to crime. And okay, that was our decision to do that, but now our decision is to do something a bit different, and that's where this comes in. So from my point of view, I'm finding it very difficult to have sympathy for a person who's had 22 offences and has been convicted 10 times. So I want to know your opinion. I realise that we have had a change of policy, essentially, and that's one of the reasons why we're having this debate now. But I can't see a problem with the new approach, because being tough on crime might actually reduce offending. It's worth a try, isn't it? So I'd like to know what you think, because I think I've made my views clear. I have no sympathy for this guy. I have no sympathy for anyone who's convicted 10 times of 22 offences. So, yeah, good luck to him, because he's not coming back. Let's put it that way. So, now I've dropped my phone. We have some other discussions. And the first one that came up, I don't actually need to show you what's on the phone, because I was discussing it on Question Time Extra Time last night on BBC Radio. And it's about the Cabinet reshuffle. So, it was a very interesting day yesterday, wasn't it? How many times did we end up having to quickly check the news? Like, who's still here, who's not? It was like a merry-go-round. And one of the things that came up on Question Time Extra Time last night, and Question Time, the programme itself, is Sajid Javid. Now, I've met Sajid Javid a few times. He came up to the Northwest for a campaign during the 2015 general election. We've had so many, my goodness. Haven't the last few years been so busy in terms of elections? My goodness. But yeah, he came up and I met him. Very knowledgeable guy, very nice guy, great guy all round. He was lovely to talk to, good campaigner. But he left his job yesterday. Apparently, the Prime Minister asked him to sack his special advisors, his SPADs, as people call them. And he said no. He wanted to stand by the people who'd stood by him and worked with him. And I can't say a bad thing about that. Fair dues to him. He stood up for the people that he's the boss of, and that's great news. But it was being talked about last night as if this is some kind of Machiavellian plot to undermine the Chancellor and bring all the power into number 10. Perhaps it is, perhaps it isn't. From my point of view, I think it's more like they want to have a very close working relationship between number 10 and number 11. Same way that Blair and Brown did. The same way that Cameron and Osborne did. I think that's what the Prime Minister was looking for. And it would have been nice if Sajid Javid had stayed on, but he wanted to stick with the people that... he didn't want to get rid of his special advisors, then stay on. Let's put it that way. And then people were saying, this is like, wow, it must be a Machiavellian plot to try and undermine the Chancellor. And isn't he great for standing up to it? And then apparently the Prime Minister panicked and tried to persuade him to stay, and they had all these meetings, and it didn't all go to plan, did it? I think actually it probably did go to plan. It may not have been the primary plan, but it did go to plan. Because the way I see it is, this is high-level politics. We're not talking about local politics of putting together a fate. This is running the country. So to run the country, you can't just have one idea, and if that doesn't work, you end up falling apart and panicking. That's not how to run a country. You have plans within plans, and then you have contingency plans, and you have plans within the contingency plans. That's the way to do it. Like four-dimensional chess here. We're not talking about drafts. We're talking about chess, four-dimensional chess. So the primary plan may have been get rid of the special advisors, bring in some advisors that would be essentially jointly shared between 10 and 11, and have the Chancellor very closely aligned and on the same page as the Prime Minister, to use an overused phrase. Now, if that doesn't happen, well, let's see what we can do to make a few adjustments and keep this mesh together. And then if that doesn't work, you go on to the contingency plan. Right, we have to say, well, thank you for your service, no hard feelings, we're going to bring someone else in. And that's essentially what happened. And I get the impression that if the person that they brought in had said, actually, no, I don't think I could either, then you have a contingency plan within the contingency plan, plans within plans, and it would have been another one. But the main focus has to be, we need a close proximity between number 10 and number 11, because the next few years are going to be crucial. So you need the Chancellor right there with the Prime Minister with the same vision. And I think that's what this was about. Not anything about trying to undermine special advisors or anything like that, like we've seen a lot of spin on Twitter about. I don't think that was exactly what was going on here. The case is, we need you to focus on this with these people, giving the same advice to you as they're giving to the Prime Minister. I think that's what actually happened. And then when Sajid Javid said no, they tried working something out, maybe keeping a few people. I don't know exactly what happened with those meetings, but maybe we can keep a few people from yours and we'll bring in a few people from ours, and we'll get what we need either way. And that didn't work out. That's what I think actually happened, rather than this Machiavellian plot of Dominic Cummings trying to undermine everyone in order to assemble his own power base. I don't think that's actually what happened. But speaking of Dominic Cummings, there was this thing that everyone's talking about as if he's some sort of mastermind and he's really running the country. And I don't think that's what this is at all. To be honest with you, the way I see what's going on is Dominic Cummings is like an American-style chief of staff to the president. I really see that more like the relationship they've got. Very close advisor to the Prime Minister who can speak his mind. And sometimes the Prime Minister would say, yes, I think you're right, Dominic, let's do that. And sometimes he would say, no, I don't think you're right, Dominic, we're going to do this instead. And then you have to just go with what the Prime Minister's decided. For example, HS2. Dominic Cummings seriously doesn't seem to want HS2, but the Prime Minister does. And I'll talk about the HS2 a bit more later on, but that's what I'm talking about here. So, because people were saying earlier in the week, is Dominic losing his power? Is he losing his control over number 10 with this HS2 thing? It's like, no, I don't think it's that kind of relationship. I think we've seen from the fact that he didn't get what he wanted on HS2, but maybe did get what he wanted on a cabinet reshuffle, that there is a different kind of relationship to what people are suggesting. The Daily Mirror, if if I can find it, the Daily Mirror had this ridiculous headline. Let me just find that. Savage Tory reshuffle, bloodbath. And then we've got Dominic coming as kind of a puppet master to Boris Johnson. My goodness, let's see if I can zoom in a bit on that. Look at that terrible Photoshop job. That is awful. Oh my goodness. Like, what's Boris doing? That's... Come on. Country is now run by a government filled with spineless stooges. Anyone who has dared to question PM and his spin doctors forced out. Come on. That's not what happened. We all know that's not what happened. Come on. It's just being silly. But this is what I'm talking about. Do you really think that Boris Johnson, a guy who has spent years trying to become Prime Minister, is now going to be a yes man to a spin doctor? I don't think so. Boris, I think, has the relationship that I've described, where he's more a presidential style Prime Minister, and he's got a chief of staff that's really efficient in making sure that the Prime Minister's vision actually gets done. I think that is more likely to be the relationship, which is why some days it looks like Dominic wins and some days it looks like Boris's views win. It's always Boris's views. He may be just agreeing with Dominic. That's what I think is going on there, rather than this fantasy story that the newspapers and the media like to put out. I think that is far, far more likely. So that's what I'm seeing. And to come back to HS2, we're getting it, essentially. Now, I've been up and down for and against HS2 for quite a while, and the reason that I'm saying this is that it depends on which view you see as to whether it's worth it. Sometimes it seems like it's a massive amount of money, and yeah, it is. It's a ridiculous amount of money. But, and here's the weird thing, this was said by Ash Sarkar on Question Time Extra Time last night, and I don't normally agree with her, because she's the one that said she's literally a communist, and, you know, communism's killed over 100 million people and counting. It's not a political view that I think we can actually accept in this country. It's as bad as fascism, in my view. So we don't normally see eye to eye, but she said something that was actually quite legitimate last night. When they made the plans for HS2, it was on the grounds of what the land values and the construction costs would be at that point. And then, all of a sudden, that land was going to be used for HS2. So the value goes up a bit. And the government hadn't already bought that land. The government didn't own that land. Now it's land that actually has a purpose rather than being used for whatever it was being used for before. So now it has more value, so the cost goes up and up and up. And of course, production costs, construction costs, everything keeps changing, and that's why we've gone from a small amount to a large amount to a large amount to a massive amount. I don't think it accounts for the entire inflated cost, but it's a significant amount in that can be factored in. And I think that is the crux of the argument. So I was actually willing to agree with her on that. And then I said that on Twitter, that, my goodness, I actually agree with some of the things she's saying. And then, ever since then, lots of the extreme left have been liking that tweet and telling me that's because she's a great person. She has all of these great views and is a woman of principle. She might be a woman of principle. I don't actually know her. But most people are people of principle. And you might not agree with all the principles, but they do still have them. So all those lefties keep liking that, and a few of them have started following me on Twitter. I had one, a cartoonist who's really aligned with Extinction Rebellion, who I think are essentially very, very close to being a neo-terrorist organisation at this point, with the amount of disruption and things that they're doing. Like, come on, guys. One of them started following me. Dude, you're not going to like what I tweet. But that's HS2. And I think actually it's going to be a very, very good thing. It's going to cause a lot of problems during construction. Of course it is. But getting those high-speed trains off the main line means that you're not having to factor in a lot of time around those high-speed train comings and goings at various stations. So it has a knock-on effect on a lot of local stations to HS2. But it also has a knock-on effect on further out as it goes, because those local trains go over to areas as well that aren't affected by HS2, not directly. So their timetable changes too, because once you have a high-speed train going down a route, you have to have a big gap on either side of that train route on your timetable to account for that train going at high speed, making sure that the line is clear both ways. So, if you remove that train and you put it on its own dedicated high-speed route, you don't need that gap in your schedules. You can bunch up a load of local services and get them more regular because there's not that gap in the timetable that has to be there to make sure that the high-speed train can get past. So this isn't me just making this up or extrapolating from my own experience, although there is a little bit of that in there where I'm extrapolating, not making things up. This is from people who actually work in network rail and on various rail lines, are all saying HS2 will mean that timetables are able to be more regular because the high-speed train isn't there to require gaps in the timetable. So you get more regular services, which means that you can have more regular services going to varied places far away, which means that you've got more services going there, which means that those knock-on effects are there's a more regular service in wider areas, which means you get a bunch of knock-on effects, which means that everywhere benefits. You can get far away stations benefiting from HS2 because you can have more regular interconnected services. East and west connections are terrible in this country. If you try to go east and west in Britain, it's a bad situation because it's all kinds of delays and irregular services. Well, that doesn't have to be because you can more efficiently timetable for them. And you only have to look at the underground where all the trains are going at the same rate, at the same speed. So you have a service, and then a few minutes later you have a service, and then a few minutes later you have a service. That's because all those trains are going at the same speed. You don't have to wait and have a gap to allow a high-speed train to go through at a certain time. So you can do that, essentially, for local services if you get high-speed trains onto their dedicated line. And it was this argument that won me over. The whole thing about, oh, you'll knock half an hour off a journey from Birmingham to London and essentially turn Birmingham into a commuter corridor for London. Yeah, you might. But that's not the main reason to do it. The benefits to the local services, that's the reason to do it. So I'm very happy with that. And that's the main thing that I wanted to talk about on Question Time Extra Time last night. I think I came across all right. It was late and I was tired and I was phoned at essentially the last minute to be on it. It was like 5, 6 o'clock when they phoned me. It's like, can you come on at 11? Yeah, I was going to be in the office anyway. I was drawing comics. So yeah, sure, why not? I'm always happy to go on the airwaves and just give my opinion. Oh, aren't we all? I mean, that's why I'm doing a podcast. My goodness. So let's have a look at what else I wanted to talk about. I've got a few things on my phone. Here's the interesting thing from Darren Grimes, which is the other thing I wanted to talk about today, the main thing. Is it wise to allow a state regulator to decide what is and isn't acceptable speech or content on the internet? Aren't we experiencing so many issues because of the left-leaning anti-conservative bias found in many of those very regulators? Now, the issue of bias is a strong one. It's one that we all have our views on, and I think we're all legitimately allowed our views on this. A lot of people claim that the media and decision makers are against their views, and that's because we are more likely to remember those views that go against what we think than those views that don't. It's just one of those things. We remember bad things more because that's how our brains have evolved, essentially. It's a good thing to remember bad situations because you don't get into those situations as rapidly. It's a bit weird like that. Also, there's a false bias in terms of memory. If we're thinking, well, how many times has something gone against what I'm thinking? That's what comes to mind. You don't think about all the times that actually the decision maker went your way. So, yeah, I think there probably is an issue of bias and making sure that that bias isn't allowed to propagate through. But perhaps it isn't quite as bad as we might think at first thought, or at least at first glance. But it has to be a check and balance to make sure that it doesn't happen. That's a fair point. The other issue is it wise to allow a state regulator to decide what isn't acceptable speech or content? Now that is the main crux of the argument, I think, rather than the inherent bias. Because do you want a government that may not actually represent what you think, telling you what you can and can't say? How many times have people on the internet made arguments against, like, the government in Iran or in Egypt when we had the Arab Spring, and all of a sudden the internet was shut down in Egypt and other places, or the current situation with China and all its crackdowns? How much information do we think we actually get out of China that's legitimate information rather than filtered by the government? How much information do you think North Korea gets? Now, I'm not suggesting that any government in Britain would be quite as draconian as North Korea. Even a lefty government wouldn't be quite as draconian as North Korea, I think. Not in Britain anyway. But the option is there. And do you want a government to have that? I personally don't. I think we've got to be very, very careful about the freedom we have on the internet and free speech on the internet. I don't think everyone's going to agree with everything that anyone puts out, and in fact, I have arguments with people all the time on the internet because I don't agree with them, and no doubt you've had arguments like that as well. Everyone who says something will get someone who disagrees. That's society. But what if the government decides, well, actually, for reasons of public order, you can't say X, Y, and Z, and you don't agree with that? What do you do then? If they're regulating the internet, what do? You can't say, oh, well, I don't agree with that, because discussion of that topic is now not allowed. You just can't do it. Do you find out how to do your own internet? Do you look up ways to get round the block? Because we've had this discussion before. All of those things with the porn filter. Remember that? What were we thinking? A Conservative government putting out this idea of a porn filter. Now, you might agree with the idea of not allowing kids access to porn. I agree with the idea of not allowing kids access to porn. I think it's a terrible idea that they could just go and get it. But that doesn't mean that you automatically turn on a filter and then essentially generate a register of people who want to turn it off. Parents should deal with their kids with porn filters of their own. Parental blocks, parental guidance things. A net nanny, that kind of thing. Stuff that's been around for ages, specifically to sort out this issue. We can't have the state taking that away and saying, well, no, you can't access that unless you tell us that you want to. This isn't a hotel where we say, can we have the adult channel, please? This is the internet, where everyone's online all of the time. And we use it all the time. And the last thing we need is mission creep, essentially. Well, you can't see porn. Well, now you can't see this stuff about this terrorist. Well, now you can't see this stuff about this disturbing news article. Well, now you can't see this thing about this political story that we don't want you to see. Where does it end? And I don't like having to make a slippery slope argument, but that is essentially what you have to do here, because this government might not do that. They might just have these things that most people would say, yeah, all right, that's fair enough. We don't want that. But the next one might not. And the one after that might not. And the one after that might not. And that is what you've got to plan for. Remember, plans within plans and contingency plans. That's high-level government thinking. That's how you're supposed to think. What is the issue that we're trying to deal with? And how will our solution to that issue affect people down the line? How can that be misused? Because that is the crux of the argument, in my view. So I don't think a government should regulate what you can see on the internet. I think what you and your family see on the internet is your own business, providing it's not hurting someone. So I don't, for example, a parent putting a parental block in on their own volition so that their kids don't accidentally see, or not accidentally, because let's face it, some of them will, they don't see adult material that they shouldn't, that they're too young for. But that's the parents' job, not the government's. The government should be there to run the country, not to run your household. We've got here a story that Ben Bradley MP put out. And now, I like Ben Bradley. He's a good guy. It says, courts prevent the deportation of a killer and 2 rapists on the basis that their phones were on O2. Nothing remotely ridiculous about that. Seems a sensible reason to put British citizens at risk, it says here. we've had this issue for quite a while with some of the court decisions, and I don't like the idea of politicians interfering with judicial decisions. To the same extent, I don't like the idea of judges interfering with political decisions. I had a very big problem with that prorogation court case. I think that was judges overstepping the mark. But at the same time, if a judge is able to make a stupid decision, like, well, your phone's on O2, so you can't be deported, I mean, come on, guys, then that is an issue that lawmakers in Parliament should deal with. And for the last 3 years, because Parliament just kept going and rehashing Brexit, now that that's done with, we have a government that can govern. That should, Mr. Bradley, that should be on your agenda. If this is the bigger problem that you're saying it is here, then that has to be on the agenda for the government to deal with. Put in a private member's bill, put in an approach at Parliament and Cabinet, talk to them, make a government policy if you need to, get it done. If this is as big an issue as it seems to be from this statement, get it done. We now have a government with a majority. We can sort this out. It's over to you guys, because at the end of the day, if judges are able to make this kind of silly, silly decision, why are they able to make this kind of silly, silly decision? The government needs to govern. Let's get on with it. We've had 3 years of not being able to do this. We haven't been able to deal with domestic abuse legislation. We haven't been able to deal with sorting out the criminal justice system. We haven't been able to do anything because Parliament kept rehashing Brexit. But now that's over with, let's govern. Let's get these problems that have been identified over the last few years sorted out. Put the agenda forward. Let's do it. And the final thing I want to talk about is this one that came up here from Facebook. And it is councillor loses seat after failing to attend any meeting for 6 months. This one really, really hit home hard for me, because I was a councillor. I'm not anymore, but I do want to get back into it at some point and get back into local government. I attended every meeting that I could. I think I missed 2, maybe 3 in the 4 years that I was there. One time I was ill. One time a meeting had been scheduled after I'd already scheduled a holiday, and I was actually away when they said, right, we're having this meeting. I think, well, I can't get there because you did it too late. And one other time, I think there was a scheduling conflict, and I thought it was a different week because things had been changed around. 3 missed ones in 4 years. This guy didn't turn up for 6 months. If you stand for local government or national government, you should know what you're getting into. You should think about, can my work and my private life accommodate this new responsibility? Because it is a responsibility. And if it can't, you shouldn't stand. It's as simple as that. You know, going into this, that this is a job with responsibilities and a schedule, and you should be able to attend the meetings that essentially you're saying you will attend by standing for election. If you can't do that, give all of the money back that you've been given, because you have a monthly stipend as a councillor. Give it back, say you're sorry, call a by-election, and then do not stand again. I have no time for anyone who doesn't turn up to any meetings. If you fought against some other people who were willing to do the job and you knew you weren't going to do the job, you shouldn't have stood. It's as simple as that. Okay, guys, this has been a reintroductory episode. It's a bit haphazard, but I hope you've enjoyed it either way. I want to know your thoughts on all of these issues as well. Please do leave your thoughts, because I don't want this to just be me talking at you and giving my opinions. I want this to be a conversation between us. So let's see what you think about this, and maybe we can get some debates going, and I'll respond next time. But next time, I think we'll try to get this a live stream, so it'll probably be a scheduling thing, seeing what time I can do it, and I'll tell you ahead of time when I broadcast it. But thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have liked it. If you did, do click the like button. Even if you didn't, click the down button if you want. It does the same thing in terms of YouTube. I just want to know whether you liked it or not, and whether you like this format of me talking to you and having occasional pop-ups on the screen. Is it working for you? Is it not? Let me know. But until next time, I've been Zoe Kirk-Robinson. You've been watching the news review. We'll give it 7 out of 10 for this week. Very newsy. And I'll see you next time.